1982's XTRO was not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what was on display here. In some regards, it's a pretty straightforward sci-fi film. In others, it's a deeply disturbing and border experimental piece. I watched XTRO a couple of days before I wrote this review, and in honesty, the biggest question that's been on my mind is whether this movie was extreme or arty enough to be a Red Triangle episode or not. After much thought, I think it just falls short of being gory, arty or porny enough to qualify. But it is bordering. It's a very weird film. To describe the plot really won't do justice to the strange side alleyways that this film explores. On paper, it just sounds like a bit of a bland sci-fi movie. For the most part, we follow Tony, a young boy who's living a pretty typical existence as a child, when one day, while playing out in a field with his dad, a strange light blasts out of the sky, envelops the field in darkness and abducts Tony's father. 3 years then pass, and Tony's mother has taken on a new partner and a nanny, and the family are living in a block of flats in London. Things are somewhat tense but manageable for the most part. Tony keeps having reoccurring nightmares back to the events of the abduction, but this is dismissed as a coping mechanism due to the mysterious circumstances of Tony's father's disappearance. That is until one night when the spaceship which abducted Tony's dad reappears and expels, well, this half-alien, half-dog, half-nightmare-fuel creature into a nearby woods. And from there the film gets a bit weird. The alien attacks a couple who are out in the middle of the woods driving, killing them and possibly draining them of something vital. It's not made all that clear. It then breaks into a woman's house and, well, face rapes her. The woman's knocked unconscious by shock, and a short time later she awakens and immediately starts to show signs of pregnancy. Her stomach immediately swells, and within minutes she's giving birth to a full-sized Tony's father. Available in all good retailers now. His dad has no memory of the last 3 years, vague memories of his life before the abduction. He can't speak initially and has multiple other weird issues, like he can melt telephone receivers by touch and enjoys eating reptile eggs. He quickly reunites with Tony and his wife, only to find that life has changed and that he's somewhat out of the circle now. Due in part to his wife taking on a new partner, having believed that Tony's dad had run off to have an affair. One thing is for certain, however, something's not quite right with him. And when Tony's father finally gets some alone time with his son, he empowers him with the ability to create anything he wants and to move and alter things with his mind, with horrifying consequences. As Tony and his father slowly begin to metamorphose into something truly alien, and time running short, it'll be up to his mother, her new partner, and the French nanny Annalise to save the day. Or not. I don't really know anymore. XTRO! I'm going to put my cards on the table with this one. I don't feel really like I can review this as a solid, coherent film. Well, not in the traditional way anyway. Typically, when I do a review, I'll break down the film into its core elements: script, editing, direction, acting, soundtrack and the likes. In effect, breaking down each individual element of the film's character before layering them all back together again to give a final summary of how each of the cogs form a uniform machine that is the film in general. With XTRO, you don't really have that. It feels like someone stripped down 4 or 5 different machines and randomly stuck the cogs together. I can talk about the direction, but that doesn't have the same impact in relation to the cine. I can talk about the soundtrack, but that won't be in any way relation to the visuals. Stuff like that is fine, but I can't layer that back into a comprehensive overview that makes the film up. That's because while all of these film elements do work on various levels on their own, when they're put together they make the film feel as though you've missed about 2 to 3 films worth of backstory and information. The characters' main drives aren't really fully explored, nor do we really have them even vaguely explained. There are moments here that happen that are just uncomfortable to watch, but because the backstory is lacking on why the characters are doing what they're doing, it just makes the whole film feel like I'm missing something. Oh, also heavy spoilers from here on in. Tony's father is one of the biggest issues here. It's never really made expressly clear what in God's name is going on with him. He's abducted, though that is questioned frequently throughout the film, and then what returns to Earth is either an alien, or an alien-human hybrid, or Tony's father but adapted with alien DNA, or Tony's dad was always an alien. It's just not made clear, nor really is his intentions. He reappears after 3 years with no memories, and yet he's heavily drawn to his son. He then bites his son around the second act, effectively turning him into an alien, or an alien hybrid, or Tony was always an alien but now he's been activated. Again, I don't know, and this film doesn't really care to explain itself. And then in the ending of the film, Tony and his father fully transform into human XTRO alien hybrids, board a spaceship and leave. Though whether it was Tony's father's intention to kidnap his non-alien son, convert him into an alien and then leave all along, or whether it just became a necessity for his real ultimate goal is never really made clear. I'm not saying that the film should tell me everything. Some of the best films ever made left little gaps in the audience's knowledge to let them think deeper about the film's meanings and come up with their own answers. But doing that is a game of give and take. The film needs to give the audience enough to work with, but take enough away to leave reasonable query. This film gives you the absolute minimum. There's no explanation as to the nature of the alien's biology, which is frequently shown but with no logic behind it, and things do just seem to randomly happen. I don't know why the XTRO monsters start as a semi-dog alien, then if they can successfully impregnate a human they can revert to looking like a human who was abducted before randomly decomposing into an alien-human hybrid. God, this film's confusing. I don't know why, if XTRO aliens are seemingly able to produce a full replica human being from one impregnation, why later in the film Annalise is shown to be able to produce multiple XTRO embryos that look nothing like the XTRO alien we saw previously, nor am I sure why Tony is able to put Annalise into a state of gestation when he himself is just a human who's been given alien powers and not a full XTRO. It's not all madness. There are some bits that do make sense though. Tony's constantly being harassed by an old lady downstairs who kills Tony's snake with malice. In response, Tony decides to get revenge by using his magic alien powers to transform one of his toy soldiers into a real-life full-size killing machine, who then goes after the old lady. That kinda makes sense, as Tony is using child reasoning to arrive at the idea of that being a reasonable solution. That, and it is kind of hinted at multiple times throughout the film that something is going to happen with that toy soldier. But those kind of bits are all too far and too few between, and I pretty much relied on those traditional filmmaking techniques to help me get through it. I clung to the moments of rationality and sound logic like icebergs, and I just wish there had been more of those. What I will say is that I did kind of enjoy this film. It had a lot working for it, even if some of it didn't necessarily sit flush with me. The direction, for example, is really quite solid, especially for a low-budget film. Knowing this was fairly low budget going in, I wasn't expecting much from it. I knew it wasn't shot on video bad, but I didn't have high hopes. The reality is that this movie more than meets the mark. The director seems to have a good working relationship with the cast, who for the most part place themselves appropriately within the scene and work with camera placements and locations to create a good and somewhat naturalistic response to the madness unfolding around them. There's a quite distinct vision on display here, which when married to the cine really creates a very tonally viewable feature. There are a couple of jump scare-esque moments, but nothing that's overbearing, and a good use of close-ups, pans and angles that work with the lighting rather than against it, particularly when the more effect-heavy scenes are playing out. It really helps mask some of the flimsier elements of this film's production. They are probably the two best things I can say about this film. The cine and direction are certainly very distinctive and interesting. From here though, things start to drift a bit. The soundtrack's really good fun. It's nice and complex in places, which suits the tone of the film. I mean, it's a sci-fi movie. But it's done on a rather cheap and tinny synth, which, again, while it does fit the tone of the sci-fi film, kinda takes the sting out of some of the punchier horror elements. Equally, the effects can be really hit and miss. The XTRO dog monster looks great. I put that mainly down to the lighting and directional choice of making it always appear in dark and shadowed scenes. They mask it wonderfully, as it does look genuinely creepy. The embryos featured near the end of the film, however, are just clearly water balloons filled with what looks like piss. The final alien-human hybrid XTRO monsters as well don't quite meet the mark for me either. They look like some of the rejected prosthetics from The Fly. Equally as mentioned in the synopsis, this film basically rips off the facehuggers from Alien, only they do nowhere near as good a job, and most of the more interesting scenes that could have been done to make these creatures seem more animate happen off screen. Basically, the onus is on the actors to make these creatures seem animate. Sometimes it works, other times not so much. The casting is also a bit spotty for me. They're all a bit stiff in their deliveries. I'm not sure if that's just because the cast are predominantly British or whether that's because of the direction, but yeah, it's a bit of a rigid cast here. There are, however, some pretty decent actors in the bunch, however. Annalise, played by Mariam Diabo, is very naturalistic. I kinda wish she'd had more screen time really beyond the scenes she's in, because for the most part she doesn't say very much, and her sex scenes, which were entirely unnecessary, only pad her out even further. And her final scene is effectively the gestation unit for a full batch of XTRO aliens, which was unexpected and quite overbearing. Simon Nash is also pretty solid as Tony. Child actors can be very hit or miss, and I think he brings a quite fluid performance to proceedings. And I was interested to read that he continued to act right up until the late 1990s. But yeah, for the most part it's all a bit detached. Again, that sometimes can work to a sci-fi film's favour, it just didn't really do it for me here. Other than the incoherence, which I have to assume is intentional, the script is fine-ish. I like the more surreal elements like Tony turning his clown toy into a living, breathing assistant who helps him do what he wants. I like the idea of a kid having the ability to do what he wants purely through his own mind power and imagination. And I like the kitchen sink three-way love triangle element that's slowly bubbling away in this film's background. I just kind of feel like the plot itself is quite paper thin, which is problematic, and the biggest issue with the script that I have is, well, what's the purpose of the XTRO in this film? What's their ultimate goal? While the end of the film would imply it was to invade, it must be kept in mind that it's Tony who creates the XTRO embryos. He has no idea what the main goal of the XTRO as a species are. And if Tony's dad was only in this film to try and transform and kidnap his son, why was this allowed and how was it allowed to happen by the XTRO themselves? It seems very unusual that a species would abduct someone for 3 years, then randomly let them and only them return. But not as a human. To collect his son for what effectively amounts for nothing more than a jolly. If the XTRO had a second purpose for sending Tony's dad back to Earth, it would kinda make more sense. But they don't. So he doesn't. It's just odd. Equally, the dialogue is a bit up and down. There's no memorable lines in this film, but when it's good, it's fluid. When it's bad, it feels like the cast are reading cue cards off screen. I get the feeling with this film that the writers had intended to go for something harkening back to the B-movies of the 1940s and 50s, and in that regard they've kind of succeeded, but in the sense that it's all a bit stiff and over-dramatised. It kind of lets the other elements of the movie down, really. This film was directed and co-written by Harry Bromley Davenport. Davenport has seemingly worked quite extensively in B-movie features and was last active on the scene in 2013. He's best known for the XTRO movies. Yes, I said movies, there are 3 of these. I'll get to them in good time, don't you worry about that. But apart from that, he's seemingly a director who's managed to carve out a pretty decent mark within his chosen field. His last horror movie was directed in 2008, and I'd love to see what he could do with the horror and sci-fi genre given a budget in the modern day. This film was also Davenport's last written feature. He had written a couple of movies before this, but they were relatively obscure. To be honest, this is probably his best known feature in writing. Equally on writing duties we have Ian Cassie, Michael Parry and Robert Smith. For Ian and Michael, this is their only writing credits. They didn't really do anything else and have drifted off into whatever profession is their preferred. Robert Smith, however, is quite an established television writer, having written for the likes of A Touch of Frost and Taggart. He's done some film work too, but again I would say XTRO's probably his best known film effort. XTRO was first released on VHS by Spectrum Polygram in either 1983 or 1984. It's not that clear. It was then re-released in 1987 as a post-cert with several cuts made to it. Through the early 2000s, it had a number of DVD releases all running at different lengths before finally being released fully uncut again on Blu-ray in 2018. My copy is the original pre-cert version, though I will be looking to get my hands on the Blu-ray of this at some point in the future, as the extras alone for this feature seem interesting enough to grab my attention. To be honest, if you're looking for the best way to watch this film, I'd say the Blu-ray would probably be your best bet. While the VHS version does smooth over some of the cracks in the production, there's nothing specifically gained from watching it on tape, and I imagine some of the more interesting cine will be greatly amplified by HD remastering. XTRO's an odd film, and I'm still not entirely sure whether I'm smitten with it or tolerated it. While it has a lot going for it, there is a distinct whiff of Alien knockoff about it at times, and while I'm all for the active surrealism that doesn't really have anything to say other than look how weird this film is, doesn't typically win any favours with me. That being said, the direction and cine are great. There's some cool effects, the soundtrack's alright, and there was enough here ultimately to keep me watching right to the end credits without clock watching. So there may be something there for you ardent sci-fi horror fans looking for something a bit different. I'd say check it out if the price is right. Just don't go out of your way for it.